Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm the curator of public programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. It is my honor to co-present today's conversation with ACLU of Southern California as part of the Fowler's Share the Mic series of public programs. The Fowler believes in the civic duty of museums to give form to different points of view. This series shares our platform with thought leaders, artists, activists, and allies who are guiding us along the arc of justice. Thank you to Pro Bono ASL who are with us today to offer American Sign Language interpretation. ACLU of Southern California and artist Audrey Chan revealed a massive mural last month titled "The Care We Create" on a facade of an ACLU office building in downtown LA. The mural is the product of ACLU SoCal's inaugural artist-in-residency program, and it was activated for the first time yesterday by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles as the new community gathering site of their weekly protests that moving forward will be dedicated to the fight to end police associations. The 5,500 square foot mural depicts major figures in the fight for civil rights and civil liberties in Southern California, including two special guests with us today, Janaya Future Khan and Marjan Vayghan. It is my special honor to introduce our guests and moderate today's conversation about the power of public art and storytelling to affect social change, as exhibited perfectly in The Care We Create, which has helped literally carve out space for the Black Lives Matter movement to continue to gain steam locally and beyond. Audrey Chan is an LA-based artist and educator. Her research-based projects use drawing, painting, video, and public art to challenge dominant historical narratives through allegories of power, place, and identity. Keep your eyes peeled for Audrey's large-scale public artwork for the future Little Tokyo Arts District Metro Station opening next year. Marcus Benigno is Chief Communications Officer and Marketing Officer at ACLU of Southern California. Since 2016, he has led the communications and media advocacy arm for the affiliate. He is currently a member of the board of directors for the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust. Janaya Future Khan is a Black, queer, gender non-conforming activist, Afrofuturist, storyteller, boxer, and social justice educator. They are the International Ambassador for Black Lives Matter, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Toronto, and the former campaign director of Color of Change. Marjan Vayghan is an artist, writer, fashion designer, and all-around curator. Quickly before we get going, 2 bits of technical housekeeping. First, when screen sharing begins, please click view options at the top of your screen and then select side-by-side mode. And if you have any questions during this program, please submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote questions that you would like to be considered to be answered at the end of the program, time permitting. All right, let's get this show on the road. Marcus and Audrey, please join me on stage. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, both of you. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. It's such an honor to have you both with us. Marcus and Audrey, I interacted with you both for the first time yesterday in person at the BLM and Police Association protest, which brought to life your mural for the first time. Can we have the slide, please? The energy and excitement there was just so palpable, and I left feeling like I had just received a shot of adrenaline, re-inspired to take on the fight yet again in 2021. It's a sensation that can really only be experienced if you take part of the spiritual movement that is Black Lives Matter, right? And it occurred to me that you guys have really created a shining example of the potential and power of art to really anchor a movement. And not just any movement, right? Like the largest racial and social justice movement in history. So let me begin with you, Marcus. Marcus, in what ways does ACLU believe that it can increase social impact by merging advocacy messaging with art? And how is this mural advancing ACLU's goals in supporting and working with the community?
Woo! Good question. But first, I just want to express my gratitude to the Fowler Museum, to you, Bianca, for hosting this conversation, and to all the folks who have joined on a Thursday afternoon in this time. And then, of course, it's an honor to sit at this virtual table with Janaya, Marjan, and of course, Audrey. So thank you all. To be frank, I mean, you know, our charge as a communications person at the ACLU is to shift hearts and minds, right? It's to make people care and give a damn on the issues that we're working on. And I think it's obvious to the audience, especially of the Fowler's audience, that art, has such a visceral and emotive power, right, to it. And the truth is, the ACLU, though not explicitly, has worked with artists throughout its time since our beginning in 1923, when Upton Sinclair, who's featured on the mural, founded the affiliate when he was striking and speaking on behalf of longshoremen in San Pedro. To Sir Lady Java, who's not in the mural, but is an incredible trans actress and activist in Southern California, whom we represented, to Jane Fonda. And then, of course, within our community partners, you see how art and activism really come to the fore. I don't think you can separate them. If we look to Patrisse Cullors, whom we've had in conversation so many times, she is first and foremost truly an artist, a dancer, a creator. And the first time I met her was at Highways Theater years ago. And we've done some collaborations like at the Santa Ana Art Center and over time. And so truly, we have come to a point where we need to see art as a tool in our media advocacy box. And really, the ACLU, especially in the last 4 years, has been in this mode of resistance. And it's been really powerful. And in our line of work, we're all about defending the law, going to the courts, and legislating. But truly, when you push and you react and you resist, what you're essentially doing is maintaining the status quo, right? You're fighting against something. We said no to the Muslim ban. We said no to family separation. We said no to police brutality. But what art does, and especially this mural, what it does for us is it reminds us what we're truly fighting for, what we're here to create, right? And so, and then of course, at the heart of our movements and our work at the ACLU for nearly 100 years are the people who show up. And these folks aren't just victims of like a state oppression or systemic racism. They're whole human beings with strengths and desires and hopes and faults and flaws, right? And they're here represented beautifully, and we anchor and honor them. So this allows us to think beyond the resistance, the fight before us, right? And so when I had met with the art consultant, Anna Iwataki, whom I, really was inspired to think about how we integrate art into our work, she and I thought about an artist-in-residency. And so in 2018, we started thinking through what that would look like. We went through about 200 applicants, and then we finally landed on this artist who's here, Audrey Chan.
Yes, Audrey, let's have both of you in conversation. Tell us about this mural specifically. How was the building decided on as a site? How were the portrait subjects selected? Talk to us about your process as an artist, Audrey.
Yeah, first, I also want to say what a huge honor it's been to be the inaugural artist-in-residence for the ACLU of Southern California. Even just learning about the residency, it was an opportunity to like work with an organization that has had such a huge impact on our society. And I was like, I just want to show up and see how I can help. As an artist, I don't necessarily know what that's going to look like right now, but let's figure it out together. And I've learned so much from Marcus's communication and media advocacy team. We've just been like in the trenches together, especially during COVID, a lot of time on video conferencing. And so in terms of this mural project, it's really the culmination of months and months of collaboration and co-visioning. And so it was during last summer's uprisings for racial justice and also Black Lives Matter's demands for local governments to defund and divest from police and invest in needed community services that the ACLU's location directly across from the headquarters of the LA Police Protective League kind of presented this incredible opportunity. Luckily, we had already been talking about doing a project on the facade months prior. And so we'd already gotten that conversation started. And we wanted to dedicate a mural to the ACLU's like 100-year history and highlight key figures. But that conversation kind of slowed down. And then the urgency of the political moment of last summer made the building really a prime site for an art action. And the People's Budget LA Coalition was really our main like community partner on the project. And they, through budget activism, exposed that the LAPD's annual budget was and remains more than $3 billion a year, even during COVID. And also the LA Police Protective League is one of a network of police associations that allow police to murder and commit abuses with impunity under the guise of being a quote unquote union. And so this was an opportunity to both call them out through beauty and also to call in people to imagine like a better tomorrow and to really uplift community organizing. And throughout the process, Marcus can speak more to this, it was really important that this was a Southern California story, that we're going to highlight activists, organizers, advocates, leaders who from LA County, the Inland Empire, Kern County, Orange County, who speak to the incredible range of like intersectional issues that the ACLU addresses. And maybe Marcus, you can talk more about that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. You sound like an ambassador for the ACLU. But
I've had some practice.
The ACLU is built up of like, I think we have about 52 affiliates across the country and in Puerto Rico. And Southern California was the first affiliate, as I mentioned earlier, that was founded by Upton Sinclair. And we represent about 8 counties in the region. And so what we try to do is really think about, Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality on so many different levels. It's not just about, ascriptive identities, but also intergenerational fights. You have Ramona Ripston, who is right by the panel, who is our executive director for decades and who really shifted the way the ACLU dealt with civil liberties to economic justice. We were an affiliate that really led that fight. That, there's a quote in there, something along the lines of how, if you don't have food or a roof over your head, how can you actually enjoy your civil liberties? And so it was really, I feel like, super important and really demonstrates that this is a mural for Southern California as a powerhouse for activism. And of course, you have the interplay of the different movements and issues that we're not only one issue people, and the allegories that Audrey, of course, can speak to.
Yes. Well, slide, please. Let's get to our next slide of detail images. Audrey, your work and your art really does so well in challenging dominant historical narratives. Can you tell us more about this approach and how it manifests in your work, but specifically in this mural, and how the mural is integrating your allegorical approach?
Yeah, so in my work, and especially in my recent public artwork, I'm actually really interested in making an intervention into how allegories typically function. And so just a dictionary definition of allegory is just they're commonly known stories and symbols that are meant to be read or decoded by a viewer. And so just like the example I like to throw, like, why do we all know that like a flying Caucasian baby with a bow and arrow stands for love? It's like, if you step back for a moment, it's like that, we know that symbol because it's told over and over and over for like hundreds of years to the point where it becomes common knowledge. But I think it's really important to question whose stories get to be told and retold to the point of becoming culture and to the point of becoming common knowledge. And so I actually feel like an artist, especially working in the public realm, has a political responsibility to create images in which a community can see itself and see its own power. And I think also working at a monumental scale is also really important, because there's a really important conversation happening in art and the public realm right now about the role of monuments in our culture and how have they traditionally been used to uphold white supremacy and oppressive narratives, and how have they been used against people? And so I'm like, how can an artist like make an intervention into the space of like monumental scale and in the space of like architecture and like a busy street in a city like LA to actually shift the narrative? And narrative change has been such an important part of my work with the ACLU. I feel like that's where my interests as an artist and their interests in communicating about advocacy like really overlap. And so I just want to point out some of the allegorical details that I wove in here. And this is actually a really great view of the incredible work that was done by the painting team led by Ader Satina from the LA Art Collective and Wilson Satina Group, who translated my design, which I created digitally, onto the actual wall. And so without them, this mural wouldn't be possible. And so the leftmost image that you see is Dr. Melina Abdullah, co-founder and leader of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. And she's pouring libations and has her fist raised. And the practice of pouring libations is a ritual to honor our ancestors and those who have passed. And at the beginning of every BLM-LA protest, libations are poured to honor past civil rights leaders and also people who've been killed by police. And this was a happy accident that I didn't actually plan for it, but the single tree that's growing from the sidewalk on 8th Street right there is actually like right under where she's pouring. And so they actually pour onto a plant at the protest. So it's kind of like a 3-dimensional coming to life of that story. And as you'll see, the building itself presented a lot of like design challenges. So there are like windows. It's a functional office building. So there are windows throughout. It's a grid. And if you look at the previous slide, there's that vertical marble slab that kind of interrupts this long horizontal band of building. And so we decided upon this idea of a kind of park-like landscape that I actually based upon the Kenneth Hahn State Recreation Center, which is an amazing example of like where civic money should be going, creating green spaces and communities of color. And so that park background kind of anchors it. And then there are these like healing plants native to Southern California interspersed throughout. And also like the dandelion, which is like a symbol of organizing and that it proliferates, but also sends down deep roots. And then in the middle top image, you have like a produce box that's this kind of time capsule of like mutual aid during COVID and talking about like food justice. Theo Henderson has house keys in his hands and a hotel in the background. He's an amazing advocate for the unhoused. He has a podcast called We the Unhoused. And so that's talking about the current push for economic justice and the House Keys Not Handcuffs campaign. And he connects to Ramona Ripston, former executive director. And there's the quote that Marcus was talking about. And she advocated for an economic Bill of Rights like since the 1980s. And then there's Marjan, who we'll meet shortly. And I do want to also point out that Janaya Future Con, Patrice Concolors, and Mark Anthony Johnson are signing Black Lives Cherish along the bottom of the mural. And I wanted to put that in there as solidarity with Black and disabled members of the community who are disproportionately impacted by police violence. And it's just like, I really respect the work of Pro Bono ASL, who are actually on this call right now, which is great. And so, yeah, so that was, there are lots of like little stories kind of interwoven, but it was this, my greatest wish for the mural was basically transforming the stretch of 8th Street into a space where people who fight for social justice like feel welcome. And yesterday, I just really wanted to make it clear that it's like, this is your space, you know, and it's going to be a space that's activated every week, Wednesday at 3 p.m. by BLM. And And there's just such a stark contrast now between the ACLU's facade and the facade of the LAPPL, which doesn't even have a sign stating what it's hiding inside. So yeah, it was a huge honor to work on this project, and I'm kind of excited to see the life it takes on now that it's up. And so at this time, I'd actually like to take a moment to introduce my dear friend and fellow artist Marjan Vayghan, who is featured in the mural with her uncle Ali. And Marjan, it's so good to see you. I think you can turn on your camera now. And hello, could you start by telling us about your family's experience working directly with the ACLU during Trump's first Muslim ban, and also about your work as an artist and activist?
Of course, I'm so grateful, honored, and privileged to be here with Audrey and Marcus and Bianca. And Future was so inspirational yesterday, activating the mural, and everyone who's sharing this moment with us. Life is comprised of all of these little moments. And on January 2017, when the previous administration took over our government and turned the White House into the white supremacy house, the very first signature that came out of that office destroyed my family's lives. We're all US citizens. My uncle was waiting in line for 12 years to come visit his son, my cousin, who was in medical school for those 12 years. He finally got his green card just to come visit. And as he got on the plane and the last administration signed in their white supremacy laws into order, his existence just disappeared. His human rights, his dignity, all of it vanished in air. And he landed at 7 p.m. We were there till 11 p.m., till 2 a.m. We took shifts as a family staying at LAX. Friends from the LA Art Girls and all these other groups came to like support us. But at the end of the day, we were left with a whole bunch of death threats coming in from the last administration's white supremacy supporters, and feeling alone, like we were the loneliest family on earth. We couldn't sleep, we couldn't eat, we couldn't drink, we couldn't function as human beings with the weight of the white supremacy house and the courts just crushing down on us. I witnessed my dad cry for the very first time in my life on national television, saying that he knew that things like this happened in other places in the world. He just thought we were safe here in America. And that's when the real life superheroes of ACLU stepped in. I got a phone call from Peter Bibbring, and he introduced himself as being one of the lawyers in the ACLU. And then a team of lawyers came in, and they just placed their mental sanity, their physical being, and they just placed themselves between us and the forces crushing down on us. And they just took the brink of that pain and they just cushioned it, and they went into courtrooms and they fought and they got signatures from judges. And I remember Peter Bibbring coming down to LAX with like paperwork in his hand, trying to keep my uncle from being deported. And they said, yes, you got the paperwork, but we've already decided to walk him back to the plane. And they deported my uncle that day. But because of all of the great work of the ACLU superheroes, and you can see Marcus there holding up his paperwork, everybody else is celebrating in that moment, but he's still working at that moment because that's what these people do. He got deported. We lived through hell. 2 weeks later, this magical moment happened. And I'll come back to this magical moment. If we could go to the next slide. Not new to activism or bad things happening in the world. I'm an artist and I'm a curator, and all of my artworks and art shows are surrounded against activism. But even when death threats come to my family towards that, they're less personal and they come from bigger institutions and not like millions of people that you can't handle. This was a show I curated at MoCA Tehran in 2007. And it was beautiful. I got to curate 67 feminist artists in this huge museum. And that same summer, before flying to Iran to curate this show, I was helping with Suzanne Lacey's Stories of Work and Survival. And there were 13 groups of women. And I got to, with Suzanne's permission, take their stories to Iran, turn the table covers into pillows, translate all of the stories, and you can see them at the center front on the top image, and everyone would sit down and they would listen to these stories and they would read the translations, and it was absolutely magical. We had Bill Viola there, and 2007 was the first time I got arrested by the moral police in Iran. They were just starting the moral police. They were just going around collecting people. And in the center of the image, you see the work of Abbas Kiarostami, and he had dedicated one of the largest galleries in the museum to all the clothes collected by Iran's government after they kidnapped people by the moral police. Later that fall, I was supposed to hand over my clothes too. And I remember thinking, I'm so glad I'm going back to America where this never happens. If we can go to the next slide. 2007 and getting kidnapped by the moral police was very scary. So I didn't go back in 2008, but when I went back to Iran in 2009, during the Iran Green Revolution moment, my plan was to go back every summer and curate a solo exhibition of every single one of the 67 artists that I'd curated in Mocha, Tehran. And I started with the watercolor paintings of Masami Terioka. These watercolor paintings were made for 1970s Japan, but they tackled issues like globalization, the AIDS epidemic, prostitution, women being kidnapped and sold into slavery in Iran was a topic that we weren't allowed to talk about, but I was able to talk about it through Masami Terioka's paintings made for 1970s Japan. The AIDS epidemic was happening in Iran, but we weren't allowed to talk about it. We were able to address it in the show. And it was a beautiful exhibition that took place, and it got opened on August 21st. But prior to that, on July 31st, I attended a funeral held on top of open graves for Nida Al-Sultan's funeral, where people had showed up to say, we know you're digging mass graves. We know you're disappearing us into the night. We're here cutting you the trip. Go ahead and shove us in these graves now. And at that moment, I was like, this is not the protest I thought I was protesting. And on August 5th, there was another protest held outside of the gallery where I was curating the show. I was pulled out of a moving vehicle on August 5th. I was blindfolded, I was hooded, I was transported in cars with their doors welded shut. I was promised that I was going to get raped and murdered and not leave that state, but I got to leave. And after I left, I went to my first childhood friend's funeral the next day. He was flayed open in black and blue from head to toe because he didn't have the same dual citizenship of American citizenship to save his life. He was just an Iranian person, so the Iranian government just murdered him. And after his funeral, where his family had to pay to make sure that they wouldn't talk about it, long story short, I stayed in my aunt's closet until August 18th, and I only left to make this piece. And if we go to open this exhibition, and if we go to the next slide, when I came back, I didn't want to go outside. Bill Viola contacted me and said that he had these shipping crates that he had sent work to the Pope in, and they had come back. And since he knew I shipped a lot of art, if I was interested in them, I was like, yes, I'll see you at 7 a.m. in the morning. I'll come with a truck. I picked up these shipping crates, I took them apart, I put them back together, I put in audio and sound and light. And for a few years, actually even currently, when I have art shows, I sit inside them, I play with light and shadow, and I look for the people who aren't afraid to collaborate with the art. And then I invite them to come sit inside, and there's mystic poetry books under each pillow. And I speak through those mystic poetry books to them. And recently, these crates have transformed into white supremacy crates. They no longer look like this. They are white. One side, two of the panels are the image coming from that you see from Mussolini's balcony, and the other two are an image of a check that ACLU got my families for $687. We didn't want anything, but Peter Bivering just happened to be on the phone when I was ordering one of the flights, and he heard that number. So there's a check signed by Mike Kelly from the white supremacy house, and that's the other side of the block. And I sit inside these white supremacy houses, and I invite audience members to come inside and discuss the price of our democracy. And I really want to thank everyone at ACLU. It's really difficult to get someone like Marcus on video because the real life superheroes and sheroes at ACLU work in courtrooms, and they work anonymously, and they work limitlessly. Those 2 weeks that we didn't eat, sleep, drink, or go to sleep, Peter Bibbering was on the phone with us the whole time. He was with us across borders in different countries where he was helping us get my uncle back. And I just really want to thank you for being with us at this moment. And I really hope everyone can support the ACLU. I'm just so grateful to live in a country where we have ACLU. I hope we can have it globally.
Thank you so much, Marjan, for sharing your powerful story with us and for being so vulnerable with us today. I mean, you're such a pillar of strength and you just wear it so enthusiastically. It's just so admirable. Thank you for using your art to confront and challenge so much of the status quo. We need more artists like you. Thank you, Marjan. And with that, I would like to introduce the one and only Janaya, future Khan, to please take the floor for 10 minutes. Everyone, if you aren't yet aware of Future or their weekly Sunday sermons on Instagram, which is my household's favorite way to go to church, you're in for a real treat.
Thank you. Since we're talking about art and storytelling, first I want to say I'm grateful to be here, and thank you to Audrey, Marjan, and the whole team. And I'm very grateful for ASL being a part of this. It's been a learning, I think it's been a learning curve for all of us, accessibility, and there's always room to grow. What I want to say is really simple. One time, I found myself with the Nation of Islam, and I was every inch the raging homosexual, and my head was shaved, and my gender identity was probably something like Battlestar Galactica. There's something that I want you to know about the Nation of Islam. There are three things. One, they are at the leadership level, anti-Semitic. Two, they are at the leadership level, homophobic and transphobic. And three, they have done an incredible amount of good in Black communities, an unimaginable amount of good in Black communities. How do we hold these tensions? I think about this time that we're in, and we're in an incredible movement time, aren't we? We went from Occupy to Black Lives Matter, to Standing Rock, to the Women's March, to No Muslim Ban, to Families Belong Together, to Parkland, and Me Too. We've seen the rise of some of these movements. We've certainly seen the rise in appreciation for the ACLU as one of the defenders of democracy. We're really good across the left at coming together against the thing. We're really, really good at coming together against the thing. Where we struggle is what we are working towards. What is it that we're building exactly? We struggle on how to get there. We struggle on whose story should be centered in that. We struggle on at what point we should begin. And what I love about art is that it sort of simplifies things. It reminds us that we're just sort of in this thing together, and there's really only two kinds of art, isn't there? There's the kind of art that changes the status quo, and there's the kind of art that accepts it. So now let's go back to the Nation of Islam. These are people who I should have nothing in common with outside of a trick of melanin. And they're my security detail for the night. And I'll tell you something. They didn't ask me what my gender identity was. Never occurred to them to do that. They didn't want to know much about my politics. They cared about something though. And this is what I want to tell us and remind us of this time and the need for storytelling. We had a bottom line, and at this point in this country, children in Black children on the street being murdered has not been a bottom line. Families being ripped apart at the border has not been a bottom line. Insurrection an attack on the capital of this country where a police officer gets beaten to death apparently is also not a bottom line. What are our bottom lines? The last question may not have been directed to the left, but what I want to know is, what are our bottom lines? That night with the Nation of Islam, we had a bottom line. We didn't agree on everything. We had a singular bottom line. They believed that my life was worth protecting, and I believe that their life was worth protecting. And I'll tell you something, just because of that, we were able to have a little bit of banter. I talked to them about anti-Semitism, was able to talk to them about some of the misconceptions of Black Lives Matter as we relate to Black men, planted seeds. And I'll tell you something, it was really funny because the biggest one, absolutely, he started to flirt with me. And he was with me the whole time. And I remember we were in the elevator and he said to me, "Don't worry, sister, I'd take the bullet for you." And I was like, is this what straight flirting is now? Is this what, you could die, but I got you though, I got you though. And I mean, he pulled out a rose out of nowhere. I mean, this person never left my side. He pulls out a rose out of nowhere. And I was like, are there like magicians in the nation? This story is important to me though, because it was very clarifying. It reminded me, in the way that art reminds me, that we have to actually move forward through contradiction, through tension, through conflict. That there isn't enough of us to cut each other off. That we've got to have some bottom lines. And at the heart of it, that bottom line has got to be about trying to fight for a kind of life, a kind of quality of life, which means we've got to move towards life. And that's all activism really is. I think we think it's protest. And I think sometimes it's in art, like that mural, but I'm going to tell you what activism really is at the heart of it. It's about being for someone else who you needed most in your most vulnerable moments. Activism is the work of being alive. It is the work of fighting and running and clawing your way back into life. That's all it is. And that's what we see in movements on a grand scale. People coming together, fighting for something greater than themselves. People trying to fill that gap where pain was with purpose. And so as we think about what we do with the fact that there are two stories that exist in America right now, right? 70+ million people vote for a bigot with bigoted beliefs. 70+ million people in this country voted for a kind of change. So this today and every day moving forward, this moment that we're in, this time that we're in the great battle of beliefs. And every piece of art, every conversation, every thought, every action is going to be a part of that rich tapestry. And the kind of art that I'm interested in is the kind that changes things for the better, something that's in service to something greater than ourselves, something that comes down to purpose. And there are things that we can do. Yes, there are things that we can do to get there. Sure, yes, we can, absolutely, we can protest and we can paint and we can dream and we can build and we can fight and we can debate and we can do all these things. The most important thing to me and what I've learned in this time is critical mass is something that's important. We can get millions and millions of people on the street. But what's equally important is critical connections. We can only get so far on our own. And this work has taught me anything. It's that there are parts of us, there are parts in us that can only be accessed by other people. And isn't it time we found out who we are? Isn't it time that we started to run, crawl, wheel, walk towards freedom, towards justice, towards a kind of life? I have so much more to say, but I want to be respectful of time. I guess I will just end with simply this, the need for art. And, you know, imagination has so much to do with this work, simply because somebody imagined shackles on Black wrists, and enough people believed it to make it true. Somebody imagined borders, enough people believed it to make it true. Somebody imagined police, and enough people believed it to make it true. And we are in the great battle of beliefs. So our job and the work of being alive is to be disruptors of what is true in our lifetime, to be the diviners of change, to imagine differently and make it true.
Thank you so much, Future. You know, you said something yesterday at the protest that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. You said, pain brought us together and love brings us back again. Pain brought us together and love brings us back again. Future, every word that you say is such a pearl, and it gives us pause. And I think that that's really what people need nowadays, is more pause. So thank you for the gift of reflection that you offer to us. If everyone can please turn on their cameras and join us again, let's move into the conversation. And we're going to use the title of Audrey's awesome mural to catalyze our conversation. It's called The Care We Create. The Defund the Police movement is centered around the integral notion of community, self-led care, that we are capable of keeping one another safe, and that more police is not on the long list of things that we do need. And so I want to ask each of you, what does a community of care look like to you? Audrey, can you start us off?
Sure. So for me, a community of care doesn't flatten or erase our identities and experiences for the sake of some kind of monolithic unity. It instead acknowledges that we're not single issue or single identity people, and that actually our differences in like privilege, access, and lived experience, from the most vulnerable people to the most resource people, is a place from which to build solidarity.
Marcus, what about you? What do you think?
I think our community of care is like a dance. And if you're able, you would join in this sort of, I know Patrice loves this, the electric slide, which is really cheesy, to be frank, but I do it. But what happens is you're able to participate or sit back. And when you miss a step, you know how to follow through because you see your neighbors and they catch you on. And I think that's a community of care. There's no question that we can, you know, we have that power in our own communities to do that, to bring that care. I'm reminded of like Compassion in Oakland, for instance, as a response to the AAPI hate that and racism and violence that's happening. What they're doing is they set up this program where you can sign up to walk with an elder, right? So there's that where you can fall back on the folks around you.
Marjan, what about you? What does a community of care look like to you?
In Iran, we have the 1 million signature group, and they held one of their largest protests in front of like the museum. And it was just amazing how palpable it felt. And yesterday, it felt like we had that in America. I feel like with great hardship, epic people just rise up and do beautiful things. I'm really bummed out to know that there are entire governments full of Nazis, and I'm really bummed out about the Ku Klux Klan coup, but I'm really excited about what's happening and all the people it's awakening. Because when you think everything is okay, you feel like you get to sit at home and do nothing about it. But when horrifying things happen and you just kind of like, what is happening? Then epic people rise up and you're like, yeah, I want to listen to Future. I want to follow. I want to know what I can do to help. And I feel like when you make great art, great activism follows. And that mural coming to life yesterday was the most empowering thing I've experienced in this country. It was amazing. And I feel like that is the care that ACLU created. And go Audrey and everybody.
Future, what do you think?
Care is curiosity, compassion, and courage. Care is not asking what is wrong with you, but asking yourself, what am I missing? What am I missing? What do I not see about this thing that's happening? Care is a witness. I think it's something that we all long for. Care is not just something that we receive, and not something that we should simply expect to receive, but something that I think that we must offer. And I think that because so many of us are operating in a kind of selfish bewilderment, we hardly know how to meet other people's needs because we hardly know how to meet our own. And so care is not just the work of expecting or desiring, it's the work of giving. And what I've learned, and the general rule for me for care, is in order to invite the kind of love that I want in my life, I have to be able to give that kind of love. And I think you show people the way when you do. It's this idea that you don't have to make people see the light, you just have to be the light. And that's what care is to me.
Thank you. And I also want to invite our audience, if you guys want to contribute what you guys think a community of care looks like in the Q&A, I'd love to see your answers. And also, if you guys have any questions, don't forget to submit them. I have a follow-up question for each of you related to the first one. So now we understand what your communities of care would look like in an ideal world. What is one action item that you can recommend to those of us who really hope to be part of creating a community of care? Audrey?
I think an action that's important to take is to figure out who you want to organize with. And that's who makes you feel empowered and who do you want to empower. And because so much of community building is based on relationships, it can be like a group of friends to like an entire neighborhood or working with an organization. And you have to kind of know that these are the people that you're going to like laugh and cry and lovingly argue with while doing the work.
Totally. And Marcus?
I mean, I think there's no question that that's part of it, to sort of look at the organizations that are, or people around you that are doing that work and joining them and finding our collective power, because you have that power. But I think part of it is just also listening, right? And then I do think engaging in art is also important, and knowing that, you know, we have to support not just our local efforts in terms of advocacy, but really also fund arts. Arts is purely labor. And so I'm really grateful for you, Audrey, and even you, Janaya, and Marjan, because that really, you are sort of prophets, right? And sort of our soothsayers, sort of inspiring us and building that sort of path forward. So I think it's important that we engage in that. So not just advocacy, but really looking at, you know, where art happens.
Right. Marjan, what about you? What's your recommendation for an action item someone could take to contribute to a community of care?
I love my LA Art Girl sisters. I love Association of Hysteric Curators. I love that I got to meet Audrey during Myths of Rape. I love that Suzanne Lacey and Jerry Allen and all these epic goddesses keep bringing women together. I feel like if women get together internationally and globally and try to heal Mother Earth together, I really believe in humanity. And I think just one of these days, we're all just gonna like come online and have that like psychic intuition. I say create. The creative multiverse is the most magical place out of this realm. And if you draw or paint or sew, whatever it is that you like doing, as long as you create, you're creating that relationship with the creative multiverse, and you will find your tribe, the other adorable beings that are walking around trying to make the same difference. I think actions like yesterday were amazing. Come to the ACLU building on Wednesdays at 3 if you want a place to start. Epic.
That's right. All right, Future, why don't you close us out?
Go to that which scares you. Move to that which makes you uncomfortable or that you know less about. I started to fight for Black Lives Matter because I'm Black. That makes sense. But that's not why I keep fighting with Black Lives Matter. See, I believe that identity should be the entry point into movements. I think it can and should be. but I think something greater should be our exit. I think we should be sharing the same values, the same principles, the same beliefs, the same bottom lines. Because if I were only to fight for my particular experience, it would mean that I would accept the oppression of others in a way, as just a reasonable exchange. That I would be okay with a little bit of power so long as I wasn't the one with the boot on my neck. So we have to go to that which makes us afraid. And I think there isn't a more compelling call to action right now than the call to defund the police. It is a challenging one. I think it makes everyone nervous. Well, who do we call? What are we supposed to do? And when you hear defund, you know, we talked about this yesterday, but when you hear defund, what I want people to hear really and to feel is dignity, decency. It is time that oppressed people, that children of color, Black children, immigrant children, Muslim children, have dignity in the schools that they're in. It is time that we had decency in our communities and in our society so that people's lives aren't determined by what zip code they were born in or what skin color. And the way that we do that is we redirect massive amounts of money and resources that go into police and away from the people. So when you hear defund, hear decency. When you hear defund, hear dignity. And I know that it's sort of fallen out and I know that it's uncomfortable, but what I want to say is this, and I'll be so fast. I know it's scary, but I want you to think about this for a moment. If you go into any wealthy neighborhood at any time, you will not see a constant police presence. And there is an anarchy. Why is that? Because enough people have what they need, and because we don't fall apart. When we decide that certain people need constant policing and control, constant criminalization, that means that we've decided to accept that class and color determine criminality and not capitalism, not racism. So I want us to move into our fear. What you're really afraid of is not anarchy. It's that people who look like me will leave our ghettos and our projects and will go into those neighborhoods and we will rob you. And this is the logic of racism. Let me show you how short-sighted that is. The best way to ensure that people are safe is to make sure that everyone has what they need. That's all this is about, decency and dignity. So it's a difficult conversation. I know it's a scary one, but I ask that you do some research on it, do some reading on it. We're not calling for anarchy. We're calling for mental health resources. We're calling for equal education. We're calling for care. We're calling for the kind of communities and the kind of potential in life that each of us deserve. And so what if we're a little bit afraid? We're also alive. And I want to keep us alive. And I want to keep people who look like me alive. And so the way forward is through. Go towards that which makes you afraid and makes you uncomfortable. That is how we push. And that is, I think, a very important call to action.
Yep, the way forward is through. And I hope that everyone watching today will join us for the weekly protests on Wednesdays at 3 at 1313 West 8th Street. I can't thank everyone here enough for joining me today. Thank you, Audrey, Future, Marjan, Marcus, and of course, Rory and Selena with Pro Bono ASL for just being so generous with your time today and joining us in this conversation that I think really hit a lot of people in their hearts. I'm so thankful for your energy with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. This program has been recorded. It will be available on the Fowler Museum Instagram and on our website, and it will be available for you to revisit and share as you see fit. We hope that you will join us again for our next program. Thank you everyone for joining us again today. Have a great night.
Thanks so much.